So, Rangan Chatterjee, I am so delighted that you've joined me on my Therapy Works podcast. You're a physician, an author, a podcaster, a broadcaster, and much, much more. And I'm just so thrilled I'm going to get a chance to have time with you and to find out what's going on with you. And maybe start with it's a big question, or it could be a small question, but tell me about a challenge you're facing or have had to overcome.
First of all, thanks for inviting me, Julia, on your show. You've been on my podcast twice, two conversations I've really, really enjoyed having. So very much looking forward to being on your show now and seeing where we go with this conversation. As you say that, the first thing to be open and honest about is that I'm having a slightly challenging day today. Because I'm okay, but the ideal part of me would have rather have been in a better emotional state when talking to you for your podcast. That's just me being honest, because at 4:30 this morning I got a phone call. My mother, who's 81, she had fallen. She set off her alarm. They then called me, so I went round at 4:30, got my mum back up, spent a couple of hours with her, got her settled, and then came back. But I've sort of been chasing my tail a little bit today, with a bit of fatigue,
Sleep
thrown in as
deprived.
well. So that's just me being honest, in the spirit, I think, of your podcast and these kind of authentic conversations. But as you say, challenges, would I say that's a challenge? I don't know. Please.
What in that challenge, what comes up for me is the years you took care of and looked after your father. And I imagine now finding yourself taking care of your mother is a challenge in itself, but also brings up that you've done this before. This is like, so a new experience will bring back, I imagine, the difficulty and the complexity of when you had to look after your dad, or maybe not.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, but it's different. It's a lot has changed in my life since my dad died in March 2013. So coming up to 10 years now. Wow, 10 years. I don't know. Yeah, gosh, how did that happen? But a bit of context, back then, for many years, pretty much for most of my adult life, until my dad died, a lot of it revolved around dad's care. Dad had lupus. He was on kidney dialysis. And one of the reasons I moved back from Edinburgh Medical School, I studied in Edinburgh. I worked there for 2 years after. I think I thought I was going to stay there, but I moved back to the Northwest to help my mother and my brother look after my dad. And that was from 2003 all the way till dad died. Now, back then, Julia, I think I was emotionally quite immature. Let's put it like that. Or certainly I feel I'm a lot more emotionally mature these days than I was back then. Back then, my identity was totally wrapped up in looking after my father and being the person in the family. Even though I was the youngest, I sort of had the role in the family. I think it was given to me, but maybe I took it on myself. Who knows? Where I was kind of in charge. Like if there's something going on with dad, like I'd sort it out. And, since dad died, I've gone on a huge personal growth journey of finding out who I really am. What is my authentic self? What does that look like? I remember in the months after my dad died, I just go walking. And the question would keep coming up for me, Julia, whose life are you leading? Are you leading someone else's life, or are you leading your own? And, a lot of that journey has, I've spoken about in public, particularly over the last couple of years. I've done a lot of therapy, a lot of inner work. I feel really good these days, Julia. I feel really happy, really contented. And so what's really interesting is that over the past few years, as mum's care needs have crept up, initially, I found it frustrating. I almost feel bad saying that, but that's the truth. Initially, I felt it frustrating because I felt, oh man, I did this for
I've
15
done
years
it.
pretty
Yeah.
much in total with dads, whilst all my peers were getting ahead and doing their thing and traveling. Like, I never did that stuff in my 20s.
Sex and drugs and rock and roll. You didn't get to do that.
Yeah, well, let's not say too much in public, but certainly,
Less.
a lot of my friends were doing at a particular time, I wasn't, right? And it's no coincidence that the real kind of what's the word? Explosion of my career. Maybe explosion is the wrong word. My passion for my career, me finding my passion within medicine, it is no accident that has happened since my dad died. Because if dad was still alive, here's the irony, Julia, I wouldn't be doing any of this, because people listening to this, Julia, who are carers will know how all-consuming being a carer is. So, in fact, and I'm not even sure I would have learnt lessons that I've learnt since my dad had died had I not gone through that experience. So a lot of what I do in public, I think, is predicated on what I have learnt, yes, as a doctor, but also as a son who was a carer, who had to look after a family and an elderly sick person for many years. Do you know what I mean? So it's a really interesting dynamic for me. So now that mum needs help and care, initially there was a bit of not a pushback, I would still do it, but I really feel there is a separation now. Like, I can go and do it, but it's not my identity. Like, I don't attach to it in the same way that I used to attach. I'll do it. It needs doing. We don't have enough care. We're trying to get care, me and my brother. It's not that easy to get the care that is required, but we're making progress there. So this morning, for example, Julia, right,
can I just pause you? Can I
Please.
pause you about your new identity? Because it's so fascinating in that, in some ways, in the adversity of your father's chronic illness and sort of long-term needs, which were completely all-consuming, you had nothing left over to focus on your career or much else of your life. You could just about keep it going, but it was the identity of being a good son, and I'm the fixer in the family, and that fed you. And now, through, in some way, going through the pain of his loss and actually having the freedom to focus a bit more on you. And I think that's interesting for people to hear, is that we have to have space, emotional space and time, and the opportunity may be a luxury, but we don't change unless we give ourselves the space. Like, you went for walks, and then that allowed you to ask that unbelievably significant question: who am I? What am I for? And as you've changed over the years, now that you're looking after your mum, being a good son, of course you want to be a good son, but as a sort of sense of a false identity of needing to be performatively good, isn't who you are anymore. You're much more fully formed in lots of different ways internally, and that gives you robustness to be more fully who you are and manage the difficulty of your mum's needs.
Yeah, that the word there was really that really landed in my heart was performative. One of the things I've learned, Julia, in my life, but as I look at my patients as well, is that the same behavior can have a different impact depending on the energy or the intention behind it. So caring for my dad, that wasn't an option for me, right? I didn't even consider, should I do this? Should I take some time for myself? No, that's what I did.
Your duty.
Duty,
and you loved him.
But I'm not sure that duty came from a good place, actually. To be really brutal now, looking back, I don't regret what I did. No. I really don't. I did what I thought was the best thing that I could do. And, I tell you, Julie, it was really interesting. In the days after Dad died, before his funeral, some of the consultants who had been involved in looking after Dad said to me, we have never, ever seen a son or a family member do what you have done for your dad for the past few years. And at the time, right, that was almost, it was nice to hear that, right?
It's like your Oscar. That was the prize.
Yeah, but actually, if I look back now, I'm like, yeah, that came at a huge cost. That came at a huge cost, right? That caused, honestly, conflict in the early part of my marriage. Now, to be really clear, I've got a fantastic relationship with my wife, but I will say that conflict and those obstacles that we've been through and come out the other side have actually made us this strong and this tight. And I actually wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, if I look back now, Julia, without those little bits of conflict, I wouldn't have had an opportunity to examine those parts of myself. So whilst many of us want to avoid conflict, if you can reframe the way you look at conflict, it's like, wow, there's an opportunity here. Yeah, I can either push back on here and go, oh, maybe I am putting me last, I'm putting my father first, and I'm putting my wife somewhere in between, right? And again, just to be clear, Vid wasn't asking me to not look after my dad. Nothing like that. So,
but there was tension in all, in day-to-day relationships. One of the battles is about time and attention, like who's going to empty the bins or look after the children, and you had very little. But what is interesting, and I completely agree with you, and I think it's not understood in our culture because we don't know how to do it well enough, is that little nodal points of tension and conflict are opportunities to look at what's really going on, what really matters. But when we ignore it, it becomes this pile that gets bigger and bigger, that then becomes something that is actually between us rather than something that we can work out together. But what we haven't got back to is the performative word, because you were on your way to that.
Performance versus authenticity is probably one of those kind of tensions that I've thought about and sat with for at least 3 or 4 years now. And it's really interesting, Julia. I'm talking to you from my podcast studio. Obviously, you've been here twice in the studio.
I recognize it.
One of the things that I've been working really hard on, or, it's actually ironic to say working hard on, because actually it's not working hard on it. It's almost letting go rather than
allowing yourself
hard.
To be.
Yeah, allowing. That's a beautiful word. Gareth, who you've met, my videographer, who's usually here when I'm recording podcasts, we talk a lot about this, about can the Rangan on the mic be the same person as the Rangan off the mic? Tonally, everything. Can you not put on a performative element when you're on the mic? And I think initially I found that very hard because there's a mic in front of you. So you start talking like this because there's a microphone here now. And this is how someone in front of a microphone should talk. But I really lent into the fact, and I'm sure I'm not perfect at it, but can I be the same person on and off the mic? Right? Performance comes in, I think, when you don't feel secure in who you are. So you perform to be someone who you're not in order to be validated. That is my whole life in a nutshell. When I was thinking about what are these obstacles, the obstacle to be my authentic self, the obstacle of actually being able to say, I disagree with you. I have a different perspective here. If someone ever someone who I liked ever would disagree or have a different perspective and would shout it loudly or speak it, I wouldn't challenge
Shrink.
it. I would shrink. I would literally go quiet because I wanted to avoid conflict at all costs. And the truth is, Julia, if I look back on my podcasting career, we're almost 5 years in.
Which is an explosion, by the way. I mean, that is the right word.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super lucky with how well the podcast has gone.
I think you're linking it with the paradox is the less you've performed and the more real and authentic you've been, the more you've been heard and validated, rather than putting on an armor or performance that then in some way narrows the connection with you and the listener.
Yeah, and it you know, I've learned that some of the best conversations, Julia, I have had in the moment, I'm not sure. Like in the moment and straight after, I often don't feel good. I feel, oh wow, did I say too much? You know, oh, we're gonna have to check that. We're gonna have to sort that in the edits. But I've actually learned, no, those are the best ones. Those are the ones where you
Really?
almost forgot there was a mic. And that really is my goal, is for my guest and myself, is can we almost get to a point where there's no mics rolling, that no one's conscious off the mic. And that's why personally I go long, because I think in the second hour everyone's settled in and it's almost as if the mics aren't there. But you know, going back to performance, I think there is a lot of performative authenticity these days. You know, we can perform it even being authentic. I think social media channels absolutely thrive on this.
Yeah,
you know, authentics, like the new rock and roll. Okay, great. Let me over
put my makeup on.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? And it's I don't know. I say I've struggled with it, but I feel in a much better place with it. Although, Julie, what's really interesting, and I'd love your perspective on this as someone who's helped, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of clients through all kinds of issues. You know, when you go and do the inner work, whatever that means to many different people, you often think, oh yeah, I've got this one sorted now. I've cracked this one.
Clean that one.
You know, I'm no longer a people pleaser, right? And do you know what's really interesting is that I honestly thought I'd cracked that one. And a few weeks ago, I won't say who this person was or what exactly happened, but someone who I kind of respect misinterpreted something that I said and left me a message, sort of quite a blunt, I think quite an aggressive message. And I reverted to an old version of myself initially. And I know why I don't know why I did. Perhaps you could help me unpick this. You know, I was a bit sleep deprived because, again, Mum had fallen that morning, right? So it was on a day where I was already emotionally depleted, maybe a bit physically depleted. So I wasn't, you know, and when we're not at our best, that's when these kind of core patterns, in my experience, start
I think that's true.
You know, come to the surface. So I changed who I was, and I became overly apologetic. I started to over-explain. And then I sat with it over the weekend, and I thought, no, you don't even mean that. That's not even true. So I actually addressed it the week after when I was feeling good, and it felt really good. I actually just said, listen, I don't think I should have responded to you last week. I wasn't in the best place. I was feeling quite emotional. This is what I think about the situation. I understand that this is how you've interpreted it, and I respect that. And I'm you know, and I said
that's yours to do with what you want.
Exactly. I said, from my side, the intention behind what I've done is this, and I could look at myself in the mirror and go, that intention was honest, it was authentic, it was full of integrity. But I also understand that you've interpreted it in this particular way. And I felt better about it afterwards. I don't think I was perfect. I could have gone further, but
Can't be perfect.
I didn't want to offend.
It's messy, this stuff. But you found your voice. I found
my voice in a way that, you know, I never would have done before. I had this tension where I'm slightly frustrated about the first response, but I'm trying to be compassionate to myself and say, hey, listen, look, yeah, you were knackered, you were emotionally worn out, and some of your old tendencies came back. Fine. You rested, you recuperated, and you didn't just leave it. You then went and addressed it in a much more authentic way. So I guess that is something I've been thinking a lot about over the past few weeks, why I reverted back and how I can potentially prevent doing that if that kind of situation presents itself in the future.
I mean, if that's a question to me, in some ways, I don't think we can, in that we have these templates, these early templates that are wired in us, that are in extremis, and extremis would be in sleep deprivation, and pushing an old button will always, I think, emerge. And what you have wonderfully shown people is that we may have our first response, but when you have more awareness and more trust in yourself, you can then have a second response and go back in with more kind of fully speaking up for yourself and having your own voice. And I don't know if you want to talk about this, and maybe this isn't the right kind of question, but I was wondering, as a child of parents who came to this country from Calcutta, having a voice and feeling you have a legitimate voice to speak, when you are not born here, well, you were born here, but your parents weren't born here, may be part of the roots that are in your system. Is that a risky question?
No, not. I'm very happy to go here. I think it's a really good point. There's kind of several levels to that. Just going back to the start there, mum and dad, dad came here in, I think, 1962, mum in 1972. So immigrants from India to the UK for a better life, right? So
more opportunities for their kids and for them.
Yeah, and I really think primarily for their kids. I think it very much was this kind of, we'll do whatever we have to do, but we want a better life for our children. So the classic kind of, I was going to say immigrant mentality, but I can certainly say Indian immigrant mentality because I'm familiar with that. Of course, not every Indian family is the same, to be really clear.
Not.
But
no.
It is I've certainly seen this pattern a lot in other people like myself in similar families. There is a huge amount of focus put on academic success. That is what is
badges of honor. Like my son's a doctor. My son's a lawyer.
You've heard this before. It's almost a cliche, but you have three options: doctor, engineer, lawyer. That is literally your worlds. You are going to become one of those three, right?
Because they're reliable income. I mean, it's not, we can smile at it as just smiling, but actually, we are wired as human beings to survive. And if our first option, I was talking to a client this morning whose parents were also immigrants. She was brought up not from a place of safety, but everything in the household was, how do we keep the household going? How do we pay the bills? And part of that is her learning so that she can pay the bills. That this isn't a small thing.
No.
This is a life requirement, that it isn't a luxury.
Yeah, totally. And so it completely makes sense when you think about what was in their minds. And, Dad faced a huge amount of discrimination when he was here, and to the point where he had to change speciality because, he was I only learned this stuff after Dad died, how good a surgeon he was. He was in obstetrics and gynecology. People who worked with him said he was a brilliant surgeon. He was one of the quickest. He was meticulous. He was neat.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was only, I learned that after my dad died. And I only learned this from my dad maybe in the few months before he did die. He said, Rangan, I used to train all the local surgeons. I'd teach them how to do everything. I'd teach them all my tricks, everything. And then 2 years later, they'd be jumping me. And this kept happening. And they all kept getting made consultant. I was just stuck at the same grade and same level. And ultimately, he made a choice for his family stability. He moved to a specialty that he could not stand.
Oh, honestly, my goodness, that is horrendous.
But he did it so he could make consultant to give us that stability. And I, now as a dad myself, as a parent myself, who does a job that he truly loves, right? I'm living my purpose and my dream. That wasn't an option for my mum and dad,
no,
right?
No.
What living your purpose? What do you? I mean, what's that got
rubbish.
to do with anything? Yeah. So
get food on the table, roof over your head,
yeah, exactly. So I totally get that, Julia. But as I say, one of the problems with that, and I think I've spoken to you about this before, and I know you've read it in my previous book on happiness, that the problem...
Happy Mind, Happy Life.
One of the problems, or not even a problem, one of the consequences of that kind of upbringing is, certainly for me, that I thought on some deep unconscious level, I got the impression at least that I was only loved or worthy of love and validation when I was top of the class or got full marks.
Right? Goodness me, that is a high threshold, right?
It
top
is.
of the class.
To be clear, you know,
full
I
marks.
can still remember, you know, 19 out of 20 in a test. Well, okay, but why didn't you get 20?
Seriously.
Second. Who came top, right? This is not uncommon, Julie, in immigrant families. That's the thing. And again, saying this with compassion, mum and dad, I'm sure, did that with love. They're like, no, wrong, and you're capable. We want you to be the best you can be. You know, Julie, you know, do you know what we get told growing up? We get told by our parents a lot of the time, you have to be better than your white counterparts if you want to succeed. Right? It's really sad.
That makes me feel like with goosebumps. It makes me feel a bit physically sick.
It's not said in a racist or a discriminatory way. It's like, look,
this is the reality.
That was my dad's experience. He's like, no, unless you're better, you're not going to get those jobs. So you have to be better. So you grow up with this mentality, right? And I can see my entire life, so many of my patterns comes right down to this core concept, which is, I don't feel that who I am is enough. I have to perform. I have to achieve. I have to be better than in order to feel, that's you know, I'm okay. I'm loved. I'm validated. And, you know, the great thing is...
Can I pause you there? Because in that not being enough, the image that I got as you were speaking, that everything is about what you're giving out, like learning your exams, being a good son, doing for others. And it isn't anything about a reciprocal, connected process that you are connected with yourself and kind of meeting the world from a place that is centered within yourself. It's much more like constantly, slightly on alert, looking for like, how can I meet the world and please the world so that I am liked enough and validated?
For sure. It really is.
And I think a lot of people actually recognize that.
Yeah, do you know what's funny, Julia, is that I was very open about this story in Happy Mind, Happy Life, like in a way that I never would have done before. Like I wouldn't have had the confidence and the security to reveal that about myself publicly. You know what's really interesting, Julia? I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but Happy Mind, Happy Life was my 5th book, right, in the last 5 years. And when I write, I have a process where my wife will not look at it until the very end. She goes, no, I want to look at it fresh at the end. So normally a few weeks before deadline, she'll then look at the final manuscript, go through it, and she comes up with some brilliant edit suggestions and insightful comments. And this time she said, hey, Rangan, listen, are you sure you want some of this in your book? Are you sure you want people to read this? Because she was trying to protect me. She was trying to think, yeah, this is your own personal stuff. And
you're really exposing yourself here.
Yeah, but I said to her, look, yeah, I've processed this. I'm okay with it. Like I feel ready to share. I'm no longer trying to perform and portray a certain image, a false image. No, this is who I am. I'm very proud of who I am. I think, like most people, I've got some qualities. I've got some things that I could do an improvement on. Like I'm a human. I'm an imperfect human like everybody else.
Yeah.
And so I felt comfortable doing that. But speaking to what you said, Julia, that many people will resonate with that. I remember on the book tour, I would share this story. And I'd, you know, maybe go into a bit more depth. And I thought maybe only immigrant kids are going to resonate with this. And the amount of people afterwards from non-immigrant families who would say, I have the same pattern. I have the same pattern. I have a similar version in my life. And, you know, the most personal is the most universal, right? We keep learning that. So that's been interesting. But Julie, one thing I've not I don't think thought about much before. And, you know, this question you mentioned about race and culture, I think this is something I've shut down, right? I think I've really, I don't know what's going to come up here, right? But
Okay, nor do
I
I.
kind
I'm
of
interested.
feel, I grew up in a very middle class, affluent, nice suburb in Cheshire. And, you know, in the 70s and the 80s, we were one of only probably two Indian families in the town and the village. All the schooling I did at a young age, you know, there's hardly any non-white kids there. So you don't realize it, but you're always trying to change who you are to fit in, because at school you've got one culture and at home you've got your two parents from India. And on
You're
one level that
translating.
they're not marrying up. So particularly in your teenage years, you really try and rebel against your home culture because you want to fit in with the people around you. And as you get a bit older
Your
again, you
peers,
go,
yeah.
well, I do identify with being British, but also with my Indian culture, and it's not about choosing. It's like, well, isn't this a great thing?
Allowing more,
you've got
yeah.
elements of both in you. So I thought, okay, that's all cool. But then what happens is that I start to get an element of public success, with TV shows and books. And, at one point, after my first book, just before my second book, The Stress Solution, came out, I was in Penguin Life in London, same publisher as you. And we had a meeting about 4 weeks to go before The Stress Solution comes out. It was a kind of meeting on where we were up to, what press we were getting, what interviews I was going to be doing. And I didn't realize at the time, but you'll notice this, and Julie, maybe you won't realize this, but
because I'm white.
Going into you go into Penguin offices, you go into publishing offices, it is very, very white and middle class. And again, I never saw it because kind of my upbringing has been like that. And I've been trained, I almost will not look at that. I never see race. I never think about those things. The reason it came up for me, and the reason I'm speaking about it now, is because in that meeting, someone from sales said to me, "Good news, Rangan. This big chain are going to stock the Stress Solution. They didn't stock the 4-pillar plan because they already had another book by an Indian doctor on the shelves." And
there's only space for one Indian doctor.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing: I didn't say anything. No one said anything. It was just matter of fact, and we just moved on with the conversation. And I remember when I got the train home that evening, I had this kind of discontent inside of me. I thought, I don't know what I felt, but I felt uncomfortable. I felt.
Do you feel it now as you're speaking?
I didn't say anything. I feel it a little bit. I mean, I have addressed it. About a year later, I sent I think was a beautiful email to the team at Penguin, a really untriggered, a really kind email explaining what happened, explaining how I felt afterwards, and how I wonder if we could talk about this to prevent this happening at some point in the future for any other author. And by taking that kind and compassionate and non-triggered response, I got a beautiful email back from some of the senior bigwigs at Penguin. We've had a meeting on what happened there. It was no one at Penguin, to be clear, right? And even the person who actually did it in that organization, I even don't hold any grudges against them, right? They're probably just in marketing, and it was probably just a matter of fact thing that they said. I very much have the belief now, and I choose to have this belief, Julia, that if I was that person, I'd be doing the same as them. This is how I try and approach life, because I really feel that if I was that person with their upbringing, with their childhood, with their experiences of the world, with their boss, with the bullying they've had, I would be seeing the world the same as them. So I don't hold a grudge. But the point I'm trying to get to is that I think the race thing has bothered me even in the past few years. That's one incident. But I've seen other incidents, big TV shows that I've gone on and helped. And then when it comes around to book PR, they go, "Oh, we have you on for other things. We can't have you, of course, for your book." And then you see other people And the truth is, you see other white middle-class presenters going on like me for other stuff. They all get invited on for their books. Now, I would never vocalize that. I think it's the first time I vocalized that publicly. And again, I have no proof or evidence for you that I can, and that's the problem with this stuff. You can't.
But it's so subtle,
But
and there's a
deep
bias.
knowing.
Yeah.
There is a bias. I've experienced it. And then what my default pattern, Julia, is to go quiet, to go inward and go, right, okay. There's this phrase that I don't think is particularly healthy, but it has driven me in the past. After that meeting at Penguin, it did drive me. I'm like, okay, you're not going to stop my book. Okay, I'm going to keep writing really good books until you have no option but to stock them. That's not healthy. That's not a healthy emotion.
That's a bit like your childhood, isn't it? It's like being 100 out, getting 100 out of 100. It's the same.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it's like, okay, that's the problem. Right, I'm going to get to a point now where you can't no longer
ignore
stop
me.
You can't not stop my books. And I'm at that point now.
You are?
But the point is, I want to, and I think I certainly did that with my last book. Like I said before, the same act. What's the energy behind it? That determines the end. But the energy of lack, okay, I'm going to show you, that's not a healthy, calm energy, right? But the energy of, I'm going to write as good a book as I'm capable of right now to help as many people as I can, not because it's going to say something about who I am as a person, but just because I want to express the information I've got and the helpful ideas I think are going to help people. It's a very different energy. So I don't know if I've answered your question or not, Julia. There's quite a lot there, I think.
I think there's a lot there in that one's relationship with oneself and one's different identities, one racial, cultural, education, gender, all the different identities, fortunately, is not a fixed process. It's an iterative process. And that, the requirement of each of our identities is two things. One is to be loved and to belong, and the other one is to stand out and attract a mate. So those are two parts of every part of our identity. And what I'm understanding about you as a British Indian, is that the right word? I didn't even know the right language. What would I say? Tell me. I feel embarrassed now. What would I say? I should know.
I think we. First of all, yes, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with any term, frankly. I don't want
you to be fine. I want you to be.
No, I'm fine with it. I'm happy being called a British Indian. Like, I don't mind really. And I think, Julia, if I could just pause you there for a moment.
Okay.
I think this is a big issue. Like, I know you. Let's say it was the wrong term, which I don't think it is. Right? Let's say it was. I could choose to get offended by that, or I could go, you know what, Julie's just trying to have a conversation. Her intention is pure. And I think we honestly get far too caught up in, are you saying the right thing? Is that the current accepted term that the public or some body somewhere has designated as the kind of right, the right word for someone?
It is disconnecting,
like
trying to be right when I'm trying to connect.
It doesn't matter to me. And actually, I think on an individual level, one thing I've really trying to do more. In fact, I'm writing a chapter on this at the moment. Is take less offense. Right?
Yes.
Just take let
it be.
Let it be. If you don't like something someone says, it's like, okay, fine. It's not for you. It's not about you. Like, train yourself to be offended less. I think it's so helpful. So just to back to you, I think it's the correct term. I'm okay with the term. I'm more than okay with it. Please don't worry.
But also what's so interesting is I could feel this surge of shame. It's like, oh my God, have I kind of done something that's offensive, which is the last thing in the world I want to do as a person to you, but also publicly, if you know what I mean. But I think recognizing not to be offensive, not to be so easily offended. And I think when people are very highly hyper aroused, they're much more offended because they have no impulse control. So they're much more in fight or flight. But what I want to get back to you, and I think I think what I'm hearing is that you are, and that, you move in and out of it as we all do on a good day or a less good day. And actually, I'd like to know what your definition of your best self is, because I don't know if there is a best self, but is what has helped you find your way into being you and the version of you that is more robust, so it doesn't get so offended and feels more confident. What's helped you? What have you learned, as it were?
I mean, I've been on a personal growth journey since my dad died, because that's what provided space for me. Like, I didn't have time before then. I was so busy, 7 days a week, rushing around, helping dad 3 times a day, trying to see my wife, trying to see my young baby boy at the time. I didn't have time. And without time, you won't get to know yourself.
Yeah.
And I see
Need
this
space and time.
You do, and you have to make time. And I appreciate some people may go, I literally don't have time at the moment for myself. Okay, fine. Even at 5 minutes once a week will just start to tap into who you actually really are. We need to know that. So for me, dad dying did 2 things. It gave me space and time to reflect, because all that time I would have spent caring, suddenly now, I've got a lot of time in my day relative to the last 10 years. But also, I was so attached to being a carer for my dad. There was a ginormous Everest-sized hole inside of me when my dad died. I took it really bad. It took me a long time to get over. But that's what caused all the growth.
Yeah.
Right?
So that big hole is where you find yourself, by actually addressing the hole.
100%. Like, if my dad was still alive, I don't know if I'd be the person who I am today. In fact, I know I would not be, because I needed and in many ways. And in fact, Julia, this is probably shaped slightly from one of the conversations you had with me on my podcast. One thing I've always done since our first conversation together is I never now use the term passed away or you've lost someone. I always say die.
You do. I noticed that. I remembered that.
And that is down to you, because something happened in that conversation where I thought, why hide it? Why try and soften it? Then my dad died.
It's a brutal reality. He died.
That's the brutal reality of what happens. So, dad's dying was a gift.
Yeah.
It was a gift. All these
at the time, not one that you felt at all, but in retrospect, you can really, really see it. That's so interesting.
Right? It wasn't a gift at the time. I didn't have the emotional toolbox to deal with my dad's death. I'd never come across death before, really, to a close, to someone close to my life. Yes, with patience, but there is a professional distance there. So it's the first time I had to confront death. I think in society, as we've spoken about before, we hide death. Like, you don't see it. It's hidden away. Whereas, it's interesting in India, even to this day, someone dies, the body is burnt in front of the family and people. You literally see
and smell.
You can smell it. And actually, I'm coming around to the view now that maybe that's more healthy, because kids growing up, they did see it. This just
normalizes it.
Just it's part of life. We're not hiding it. We're not trying to say lost, or any other
make
thing
it
to
tidy.
soften it. We're saying it's real. And I'm very particular with my children now about death. We don't hide it. We talk about it. In fact, when my auntie died last summer, in her early 60s, unexpectedly, we went to a funeral in Northampton. And in Indian culture, in this country, you just before the funeral, you visit the body, and there's a ceremony done around the body where you can actually see the body in the coffin.
So this is a Hindu ceremony.
It was a Hindu ceremony just before the actual funeral. And my kids last summer were 11 and 8, and me and my wife were discussing it. Are they ready for this? Should they go? We decided to take them. And we took them, and I felt really good that we took them to that, because they saw their, my auntie, their sort of like a grandma to them who they actually saw, oh, that's what happens after death. That's the body, but there's no life and vitality within it. And
that's what death looks
that
like.
isn't, yeah. And I think that's been really, really important. So back to your question, what's helped me? Dad dying, the space it gave me, the lessons it taught me. I have done therapy. I've done a particular type of therapy called IFS, Internal Family Systems, which
Brilliant.
I have found
Dick Schwartz,
Dick Schwartz, incredibly helpful for me. Again, I'm not saying
all
it's
the
for
different
everyone.
parts of you.
Yeah, and learning to accept that all these different parts of me are real, and at different times, different parts will come to the surface. And understanding that I am actually a complex makeup of all of these different parts. That's helped me.
And can I say part of your parts is still being at times performative, or at times a people pleaser, or and at other times you're robust and confident and kind of out there, so that it isn't like when you've had therapy that you lose the parts that you don't want. It's just that you have the capacities to support yourself, given that you have all these different parts.
Yeah, I think what all the work has done, whether it be the long walks, the reflection on Dad, the therapy, some of the body work I've had done, I can see how certain parts of tightnesses I had were actually emotional. I was holding on to emotions in certain parts, and as I release those emotions, that body part loosens up. So it wasn't about constantly stretching it. It's like, no, your body was holding tension
Releasing.
there for a reason. What it's done, Julia, is give me a real deep sense of awareness, self-awareness. And I think that's the most important thing that I have acquired over the past few years. The awareness to know when it's an old part of me. The awareness to know that just a few weeks ago when I reverted back, the awareness to know, oh yeah, that's what you did there. And
to recognize
it sounds so simple, but
it's a big thing.
When it's happening and you're not aware, you just think it's you. You don't know why you're frustrated. You don't know why. But when you can
keep digging the hole, don't you, and jumping in the hole.
Yeah.
But awareness allows you to go, there's that hole.
There it is. Why? Oh, you're sleep deprived. This is going with mum. That's why. Okay, cool. Have a few days rest and then consider how you might want to address this. And I feel the biggest thing that I do, Julia, which has really empowered me, is I look at every bit of friction in my life now as an opportunity for me to learn something about myself. So instead of looking out there for answers, I don't anymore. I literally don't. Like if I'm getting triggered or reacted for anyone, the trained default response now most of the time is, why is that bothering you? What is that bringing up in me? And what that does, Julia, and why I'm so passionate about this, is because it means I'm not reliant on the world around me and people around me and things around me to be a certain way. I realize that I have the power to choose how I respond, or how I, what slant I put on this particular situation. And I actually think it's such a simple thing at its core, but it's so effective.
And so really complex. That Viktor Frankl quote.
Yeah.
That, at any moment you have the opportunity to choose what your response is. And what I'm getting is that in being able to choose, like going inwards rather than being angry with the person out there, or blaming or shaming, or you then have agency. I mean, I had a conversation on Monday that left me so furious. I can't even tell you. I could literally nearly drove my car off the road. And I was repeating this looping, ruminating thing about what the person had said. And luckily, I'm 63. I should know by now. I didn't send a text, which I wanted to do. I didn't reply. I didn't say anything. I waited a few days. And then I worked out what it was in me and what I actually felt. Because when you're in that heightened state, you're in no place. You're not using your brain, your memory, your emotions. You're just using your attack when you're under threat. And I think, is that what you're saying? Or were you saying something more than that?
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. But I'll just add to that
Oh, good.
that for me at least, like I just reflect on nearly 10 years since Dad died, right?
It's like you've been at the University of Life, right? Doing your job and
100%. And
succeeding.
actually, I wouldn't trade in a single one of those experiences. Even what happened at Penguin, nothing. I wouldn't trade it in, because without those experiences, you're not given the opportunity to learn something that's still bothering you. While life is going all hunky-dory, you think everything's fine.
Yeah,
and
in
then
the sweet zone.
Often you become... Yeah, but then the problem is, if that goes on for too long, you in many ways become ill-equipped to then deal with anything. Julie, I've not...
But actually, it never goes on forever, does it? The sweet zone, however successful you are, it's never always sweet, right?
Really interestingly, a couple of months ago, I spoke to the record producer Rick Rubin when he was in London. Now, we've not released it yet. It's coming out in January when his book's out. But he's regarded as one of the best record producers of all time. He's done Adele, Jay-Z. I think he's done
huge
Red Hot Chili Pepper. I mean, he's literally done everyone in every genre.
And you love music, so he's your guy.
Yeah, but his book is incredible, by the way, in terms of his insights on life. But really interestingly, Rick shared with me that in his 20s, I think he started being a record producer maybe at 2021, and he basically produces the Beastie Boys' first album, which is one of the all-time best-selling records of all time, right? So he goes straight to the top, and he continues staying at the top. And then he shared that later on in his 20s, someone in the industry made a negative comment about him. And he said it was a nothing comment. Literally, he said it was a nothing comment, but it sent him into depression, right? And he said...
Well, but you have further to fall if you've built up on this thing of success.
Yeah, but he also said, what he said is something like, and the conversation was a couple of months ago, so I can't remember word for word, but what he said, Julia, was, my childhood, my life, my career had just been great until then. I hadn't had any conflict. So I didn't have the tools to deal with just this minor comment. And I found that I've been meditating on that quite a lot, because I find that really interesting. Actually, we think we want a life without conflict, but maybe we don't. Maybe if we can get good at conflict and use conflict as a way of teaching us... And distress. Maybe we're constantly kind of finessing our soul. We're finessing, our approach to life. We're I look at these things as gifts now. Oh, man, it's a gift that you've been triggered. Now, I get it. I'm not always like that. In the moment...
No, you want to punch someone. Yeah, but you can slow down after.
But I do think now, Julia, very quickly, even if I'm quite triggered, within hours, I'll be thinking, okay, all right.
What's really going on?
What's really going on? And here's the other thing people often say to me when you talk about this stuff, and I love your perspective here, Julia. Some people say, well, yeah, but what about sometimes people's behavior is really bad, So surely it is about that person's behavior. And the way I look at it, I go, okay, sure, this is not saying you should accept and tolerate inappropriate or poor behavior. No, but if you can, first of all, take a pause, understand why it's bothering you so much, and then make peace with that, then you're much better able to put in appropriate boundaries. You're much better able to make changes, which will mean that behavior is less likely to continue. That's certainly my take. What's your take on that?
I completely agree. And I'm sort of thinking around the Christmas table or big family holidays, there's always the uncle or the grandparent or someone, or families trigger us, don't they? Because they're embodied and we have all the sights and sounds and smells of being members of our family. And so rather than kind of, getting battle ready and kind of knowing and dreading it, I think what you're talking about is real wisdom of course, there are going to be things that upset me, but what I do with what upsets me is in my gift. And I can choose to make sense of why that has particularly upset me. And that's owning myself, supporting myself, giving myself the confidence that I am worthy of knowing what it is that's upset me, naming it, rather than like always putting the power outside of yourself. So it's empowering. And then as you slow down and you connect with yourself, you're in a really strong position to respond in a way that might create change in the other person, that might stop a huge family row, because you're coming from a place of connected human calm, which is transmittable in the same way as emotionally contagious as fury is. But if you come from genuine calm, not, sometimes people speak slowly and they kind of think they're in control. But if it's from a heartfelt center, people pick that up and they respond to your heart, basically, to your connectedness.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I completely agree. And I think understanding these things and then practicing them, because I think that's the
because
key element,
you'll make a mistake. Yeah,
exactly.
practicing.
And but if you can truly be honest with yourself, that's the thing, you can't hide from yourself. Like in those quiet moments, what really went down, and if you can be honest with yourself, you can kind of own it and go, yeah, you know what, I did react then. This is the reason. Okay, let me sit with that. Next time this happens, my intention is not to react in the same way. That is so powerful. You may still react, but you keep doing that. At some point, your life will shift. And I feel now a lot of these individual learnings that I've had, I feel they've hugely impacted the way I communicate with my wife. And
how lovely for both of you.
Yeah, and likewise, Vid's been on her own journey of dealing with her own stuff, and as we individually have gone and dealt with some of our own baggage from childhood and early life, we then bring a different form of us to our relationships. And the funny thing is, Julia, as I think about it now, in fact, what's the date? 11th. Okay, what? It's not far from my 15th year wedding anniversary with Vid. So
lovely.
Yeah, almost been married for 15 years.
Wow, that's a proper.
And I can honestly say we've never been closer. We've never been more connected. We've never been able to communicate with the kind of depth that we can do now. And a lot of that has not been easy, just to be really clear. A lot of that has taken work and time. But I would almost say the relationship we have now is not the same as the one we had 15 years ago. It's not even the same as the one we had 5 years ago. And actually, one of these things you commonly hear, I heard this in some mutual friends of ours recently, that said, I don't know what's happened to her. She's just not the same person she was when I married her. And part of me is thinking, well, who is?
Hopefully.
Who is the same person? And actually, if you're stuck being that same person you were 15 years ago, maybe that's the problem in that relationship, or one of the contributing factors. So this is why I think therapists, what you do, and I think I said this to you before, part of me thinks maybe I should have been a therapist.
You'd have been a great therapist. You'd have loved it.
Yeah, but I kind of feel I sort of do that with my patients, really.
Your guests.
Although I'm not a trained therapist or a trained psychologist, I kind of feel that's what I end up doing a lot with my patients, because that's kind of what's needed to impact their long-term health and well-being.
But I think, we need to draw to a close, and I've got just one more question. But what you're really saying is, if we're going to live life, we need to recognize that life is change and that we are adapted to grow through change. And if we can support ourselves and find ways of supporting ourselves to let the change us, and pain is the agent of change often, then we have many opportunities to really live a very rich life. And when we kind of limit ourselves with very fixed beliefs or ways of operating or ways of being in relationship in our partnership, or as a child, or as with a parent, or as a parent, we then live a much narrower bandwidth of life, and that's kind of quite flat and empty. So I've got one more question. So given these last 10 years, Rangan, which have been ones of enormous learning and also huge success, probably surprising how you must be surprised how successful you've been.
Yeah.
Where does
I
that
mean,
leave you in the present? How you feel about yourself and what do you want for maybe the next few years? We'll make it a shorter skyline. 5 years.
how do I feel about the success? I'm very proud of the success. I'm pleased with the impact my success is having on the lives of hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people.
It's a real meaning.
But the key thing I've learned through that success is that it's not the success that's making me happy. I've learned hugely that success and happiness are two very different things. They can overlap for sure for some people at certain times in their life, but more often than not, they're often different. And I think
And one is much thinner than the other.
Yeah, and I think I've definitely fallen into the trap, like many people do, that they're the same things. But we see time and time again successful people feeling unfulfilled, people in all walks of life getting to their 30s or 40s thinking, I've ticked off all the boxes that I thought I needed to tick when I was a kid, that my parents told me about, that society told me about, but there's still something missing. And
Feel
so,
empty.
as someone who needed external validation growing up to feel good about themselves, what's really interesting for me is that I've got all the external validation I could have possibly wanted over the past few years. But now that external validation doesn't do what it would have done for me 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago, in many ways, it would have artificially elevated my ego, right? Whereas now it really
Which is a full self in our trade, not the real true self.
It is a what, sorry?
In our trade, it's called the full self, not the true self.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. I love that. So, and that's a very fragile place to be, because I've been in that place before. It's very fragile because if you let the good stuff go to your head, the negative stuff is going to take you down just as far.
Like and the producer.
Exactly. Whereas what I found now is that I'm just a lot more level. That the praise, the positivity just makes me feel, oh, good, I'm super glad that helped. It doesn't make me feel really, really artificially high.
Pumped,
but it also means I don't get dragged down to those deep lows where you feel worthless, right? So I feel a lot more level and grounded.
Calmer. Yeah.
So what do I want for the next few years?
Yes, well, I'm really interested to know.
I want more presence.
Nice.
That really is, if I try and get to the essence of what I think life is about, Julia, I think it's presence. Can I be present?
Can you unpack
in
that?
every single moment? Can I be present?
So can you tell me first what present means to you?
Present. Let me explain what present doesn't mean, first of all, right? I'm sitting in my podcast studio now, which is in my garden, right? So I could have a brilliant 2-hour conversation in here with a guest that I'm really looking forward to speaking to and be absorbed. If I then go in to have dinner with my wife and kids and I'm still thinking about that conversation and I'm not able to be present with them in that moment,
embodied in your mind and body,
that's doing them a disservice, actually, and myself a disservice. I can justify, that was important, but I've got back for dinner, right? Fine, whatever. But when I say presence, I mean, can I fully be in every single moment, mind, body, and soul, right? I don't think
that is a big ask. Can I just say that is a big ask? I can't do that.
No, I when I say that, let me just try and reframe it slightly. Can I be more present than I currently am? Yeah, right. So what I'm looking for is an improvement. Can I keep doing the work, keep looking for moments of friction in my daily life to teach me something about myself? Can I hopefully over time get triggered less? I already get triggered very rarely now compared to the past. And honestly, I feel these days
Much less febrile.
Yeah, I'm a pretty calm person. Even I think my wife would say you rarely, you're totally chilled. Like if someone says something, it's like, yeah, I'm already seeing their side of it. And and people want you to I don't mean my wife, but people want to
Take
drag you
sides.
into gossip. And so I'm like, yeah, but from their perspective, this is probably why they think that. And by consciously practicing that, Julia, it was an effort, but by consciously showing up day after day and doing that regularly, it's now become my conditioned default response. So you have to do less work at the other end when you get triggered. Like a lot of, what I find really ironic is that I talk a lot about things like meditation and breath work and journaling and
being in nature.
Being in nature. These things are all great for sure. But actually, often we need a lot of these fixes to deal with the overload of stress in our lives. But once we learn to get triggered less and be more compassionate and understand someone else's point of view, I find we actually need those solutions less because we've got less stress that needs managing.
I tell you what, the presence, what I haven't heard it said like you've said it in the way that I'm picturing what I'm just about to say, which is the presence, as I understand it from you, means that you have the capacity to step in from your world into the world of another person, connect with them, have empathy with them, and then step back into your world, a kind of much more reflective interaction. So then the other person is no longer a threat. They're no longer someone who can hurt you, like from a kind of evolutionary perspective, because you've opened your heart with compassion and you've allowed your heart to reach across. Like with me in this conversation, I can feel you. Even though we're online, I can feel your honesty. I can feel your heart. I can feel the clarity of the passion of what you're thinking. And so then it's much less oppositional. So you're not going to see the world as a place of danger. You're going to see the world from much more a place of safety. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm thinking about that because I love the way you frame that. It wasn't how I was thinking about it in my head. Certainly wasn't how I was rationalizing it. But as I hear it and I sit with it, it kind of makes a lot of sense. And I guess, for example, I was thinking, as I was trying to process that, I was thinking, yeah, okay, so why would I ever perceive my kids as a threat? I wouldn't. But if I'm in that kind of slightly tense stress state thinking about something else, then if that's my being over the dinner table, then little things that they may say may be perceived as a threat because I'm not in a calm state to receive it. So I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. I think that really nails what it is really, really quite beautifully.
Oh, that's a very nice moment to pause and connect. And maybe, I don't want to end the conversation, but to end the conversation. Thank you so much, Ron.
Julia, thanks for inviting me.
It's really meaningful. I feel full. I feel like I feel like in my kind of heart center, I feel like I've been very touched by hearing you. So I really appreciate that.
I hope so. And I'm glad we got this in. I'm glad you text me and I was just like, right, let's get this date in, done and dusted. And I really enjoyed that. I feel nourished from it as well, Julia. And I hope it resonates with your audience.